Let's start the book, To Kill a Mockingbird. Introduction: Losing Innocence in a Divided World. To Kill a Mockingbird is a profound and timeless exploration of human morality, viewed through the innocent eyes of a child navigating a deeply prejudiced world. This masterpiece masterfully contrasts the warmth of childhood wonder with the harsh, unforgiving realities of racial injustice in the American South. It is an essential, soul-stirring journey that challenges us to confront our own biases, celebrating the quiet, unyielding courage required to stand up for what is right, even when the entire world seems to be against you. Point 1. Welcome to the sleepy town of Maycomb. We begin our journey in a place where time seems to stand still, a tired, old town in the heart of the American South, during the suffocating grip of the Great Depression. The town is Maycomb, Alabama, a deeply insular community where everyone knows everyone else's business, and generations of families have lived on the same plots of land for decades. The unpaved streets turn to thick red slop during the spring rains, and the oppressive, relentless summer heat makes the air shimmer in the distance, forcing bony mules and stray dogs to pant heavily in the meager shade of the courthouse square. There is a distinct sense of stagnation in Maycomb. There is nowhere to go, nothing to buy, and no money to buy it with. Yet, for a young, fiercely independent tomboy named John Louise Finch, known to everyone simply as Scout, this small, dusty town is her entire universe, filled with endless mysteries, unspoken rules, and towering figures of authority. Scout is not your typical Southern belle in training. She prefers the freedom of denim overalls to the constraints of starched dresses, and she would much rather settle a dispute with her fists than with a polite conversation. She lives with her older brother Jim, who is her constant companion, her protector, and occasionally her tormentor, as older brothers tend to be. Their mother passed away from a sudden heart attack when Scout was merely 2 years old, leaving the children in the care of two incredibly profound figures. The first is Calpurnia, their fiercely loyal, stern, and deeply loving African-American cook. Calpurnia is the undisputed ruler of the Finch household during the daylight hours, a woman of immense dignity who teaches Scout the harsh lessons of respect and manners, often dragging her out of the kitchen when she misbehaves. The second, and perhaps the most monumental figure in their lives, is their father, Atticus Finch. Atticus is a man of quiet, unwavering integrity. He is a prominent local attorney and a state legislator, but to Scout and Jim, he is simply a father who treats them with an unusual level of respect. Unlike other parents in Maycomb, Atticus does not talk down to his children. He answers their endless, sometimes embarrassing questions with complete honesty, and he operates on a foundational philosophy of radical empathy. He famously tells Scout that you never truly understand a person until you consider things from their point of view, until you climb inside of their skin and walk around in it. This single piece of advice becomes the moral compass for the entire narrative, a guiding light that Scout will desperately need as the story unfolds. The rhythm of their childhood is dictated by the changing of the seasons, but summer is their undisputed kingdom. The boundaries of their world are strictly defined. Mrs. Henry Lafayette DuBose's house 2 doors to the north, in the mysterious Radley Place 3 doors to the south. It is during one particularly sweltering summer that a new element is introduced into their insular world. They discover a peculiar boy sitting in Miss Rachel Haverford's collard patch. His name is Charles Baker Harris, though he goes by Dill. Dill is a tiny, eccentric, and fiercely imaginative boy from Meridian, Mississippi, who comes to spend the summers with his aunt. With his snow-white hair, his oversized tales of seeing Dracula in the cinema, and his insatiable curiosity, Dill breathes new life into Scout and Jim's daily routines. Dill acts as a catalyst for the children's imaginations. He is unimpressed with their standard games of treehouse climbing and tire rolling. Instead, his eyes are drawn to the one place in Maycomb that instills terror in the hearts of children and commands the hushed whispers of adults. the Radley Place. The house itself is a decaying, unpainted structure surrounded by overgrown weeds and an aura of malevolence. According to local legend, a phantom lives inside. This phantom is Arthur Boo Radley, a man who has not been seen outside of his home in over 15 years. The rumors are wild and terrifying. Some say he wanders the streets at night, peering into windows. Others claim his breath freezes the azaleas. And the most famous piece of local gossip alleges that he once casually drove a pair of scissors into his father's leg before calmly returning to his newspaper. For Scout, Jem, and Dill, Boo Radley is not a tragic figure of isolation. He is a local monster, an urban legend to be feared and fascinated by. Their summer days quickly become consumed by the singular, burning desire to make Boo Radley come out. They spend hours formulating elaborate plans, daring each other to run up and touch the side of the house, and eventually, they even create a highly dramatized, entirely fictional street play based on the rumors of Boo's life. They act out the infamous scissors incident with dramatic flair, pausing only when they suspect Atticus is watching them with a disapproving eye. Atticus, true to his nature, sees exactly what the children are doing. He does not yell or punish them aggressively, but he firmly instructs them to stop tormenting the man. He tries to instill in them the understanding that what Mr. Radley does is his own business, and if he wanted to come out, he would. He urges the children to respect the privacy of a man who has chosen to remain hidden from a world that has likely been unkind to him. But the allure of the unknown is too strong for the children to resist entirely. The seed of curiosity has been planted, and the silent, dilapidated house at the bend in the road will slowly evolve from a terrifying haunted house into a profound source of connection, shaping the children's understanding of humanity in ways they could never have anticipated. Point 2. The Ghost in the Radley House. There is a profound shift that occurs when childhood myths collide with tangible reality. And for Scout and Jem, this collision begins at the edge of the Radley property. Despite Atticus's stern warnings to leave the Radley family in peace, the children cannot entirely shake their fascination. Their fear of Boo Radley is a thrilling, delicious kind of terror, the sort that makes their hearts race as they sprint past his completely silent house. However, the nature of their relationship with the unseen Boo begins to change through a series of small, almost magical discoveries hidden within the gnarled roots of a massive oak tree standing at the edge of the Radley lot. It starts innocently enough on a typical afternoon as Scout is running home from a rather miserable day at school. Out of the corner of her eye, she spots something shiny, glinting from a knothole in the ancient oak tree. Driven by a child's natural curiosity, she investigates and finds two pieces of Wrigley's Double Mint chewing gum, stripped of their outer wrappers. Despite the terrifying proximity to the Radley property, the temptation is too great. Scout inspects the gum, sniffs it, and deciding it isn't poisoned, shoves it into her mouth. When Jem discovers what she has done, he is absolutely horrified, demanding she spit it out immediately, convinced that anything originating from the Radley lot must be deadly. Yet Scout survives, and thus begins a silent, extraordinary line of communication between the children and the Phantom of Maycomb. Over the coming weeks and months, the knothole becomes a secret post office. The children find more treasures: a small box containing two polished Indian head pennies, a ball of gray twine, an old spelling bee medal, and a broken pocket watch on a chain accompanied by an aluminum knife. The most astonishing discovery, however, takes the form of two small figures intricately carved out of soap. As Scout and Jem examine the figures, they realize with a jolt of shock that the carvings are exact, miniature replicas of themselves. A boy with a shock of messy hair and a girl wearing a crude dress. Someone is watching them. Someone knows them. And more importantly, someone is trying to give them gifts. The realization that Boo Radley might not be a bloodthirsty monster, but rather a lonely, observant man reaching out for human connection, begins to dawn on Jem. He is older than Scout, more perceptive to the subtle tragedies of the adult world, and he starts to understand the deep sorrow of Boo's isolation. Jem and Scout decide to write a letter of gratitude to their mysterious benefactor. They carefully draft a note, thanking him for the gifts, and march to the tree to leave it in the knothole. But when they arrive, they are met with a devastating sight. The knothole has been filled with rough, gray cement. When Jem spots Nathan Radley, Boo's cold and unapproachable older brother, he asks him why the tree has been cemented. Nathan flatly claims the tree is dying and that you plug a sick tree with cement. Later, when Jem casually asks Atticus about the tree, Atticus observes that the tree looks perfectly healthy, its leaves green and full. The truth hits Jem with the force of a physical blow. Nathan Radley did not plug the tree because it was sick. He plugged the tree to cut off Boo's only connection to the outside world. He severed the fragile thread of communication between a deeply lonely man and the children he had grown fond of. That evening, Scout hears Jem crying silently on his cot on the sleeping porch. It is the first time Jem truly confronts the profound cruelty of the world, shedding tears not for himself, but for the quiet, imprisoned man next door. This growing realization of Boo's humanity is further cemented during a bitterly cold winter night. Maycomb experiences a rare snowfall, a magical event for the children, but the joy is short-lived. In the dead of night, Scout is jolted awake by Atticus. The sky outside is glowing a chaotic, terrifying orange. Miss Maudie Atkinson's house, located just across the street, is engulfed in roaring flames. The entire neighborhood mobilizes in a desperate, chaotic effort to save the surrounding homes. Atticus instructs Scout and Jem to stand far out of the way, down in front of the Radley place, and to stay put. As they stand shivering in the biting cold, watching the devastating destruction of their neighbor's home, Scout is too distracted by the raging fire to notice the freezing temperature. It is only hours later, when the fire has finally been subdued and the exhausted neighborhood returns to their homes, that Atticus notices something strange. Scout is wrapped in a heavy brown woolen blanket that does not belong to the Finch household. Atticus asks her where she got it, and Scout is completely bewildered. She has no idea. She never left the spot by the Radley gate. With a gentle, knowing smile, Atticus explains to Scout that while she was completely captivated by the fire, someone must have slipped out of the dark house behind her and draped the blanket over her freezing shoulders. It was Boo Radley. The realization sends a shiver down Scout's spine, but it is no longer a shiver of fear. It is a profound sense of awe. This invisible man, the monster of their childhood nightmares, had seen a little girl shivering in the cold and had quietly, gently provided her with warmth, asking for absolutely nothing in return. The ghost in the Radley house was not a monster at all. He was a silent guardian angel watching over them from the shadows. Point 3. A shift in the wind. As the seasons change in Maycomb, so too does the atmosphere surrounding the Finch family, signaling the end of an era of pure innocence. The childish games of summer and the magical mysteries of the Radley tree are suddenly overshadowed by a much darker, far more pervasive reality. The sleepy, predictable rhythm of the town is disrupted by a low, persistent rumble of gossip and judgment, and the source of this tension sits squarely on the shoulders of Atticus Finch. Atticus has taken on a legal case that is sending shockwaves through the deeply segregated community. He has been appointed to defend a black man named Tom Robinson, who has been accused of raping a white woman, Mayella Ewell. For Scout and Jem, the implications of this case do not hit them all at once. Instead, the reality bleeds into their lives through the cruel, offhand comments of their peers. At school, Scout is confronted by a classmate, Cecil Jacobs, who boldly announces to the schoolyard that Scout's father defends niggers. Scout, who has never backed down from a physical altercation, is entirely ready to beat Cecil to a pulp, even though she does not fully comprehend the racial slur or the gravity of the accusation. When she asks Atticus what the phrase means and why people are saying it, Atticus sits her down for a conversation that forces her to look beyond the boundaries of her childhood playground. Atticus explains the situation with his usual calm, measured tone. He tells her that he is defending a man named Tom Robinson, a member of Calpurnia's church, and a good man. He acknowledges that almost everyone in Maycomb believes he shouldn't be doing it, but he explains that if he walked away from this case, he could never hold his head up in town again, he could never represent the county in the legislature, and he could never even tell Scout or Jem not to do something again. For Atticus, defending Tom Robinson is not just a legal obligation, it is an absolute moral imperative. He recognizes that they are fighting a losing battle, that the deep-seated prejudices of Maycomb are a mountain they cannot climb, but he imparts a crucial lesson to his daughter. Simply because you are licked 100 years before you start is no reason not to try to win. He asks Scout to do one incredibly difficult thing for him, to fight with her head, not her fists, and to walk away from the provocations. This promise is immediately put to the test during the family's annual Christmas gathering at Finch's Landing, the ancestral home. The holidays bring the arrival of Aunt Alexandra, Atticus's sister, who is the embodiment of traditional Southern gentility and societal expectations. Aunt Alexandra is perpetually horrified by Scout's tomboyish behavior, her dirty overalls, and her lack of interest in becoming a proper lady. She views Scout's unrefined nature as a direct failure on Atticus's part. However, the true conflict of the holiday arises not from Aunt Alexandra's nagging, but from Scout's cousin, Francis. Francis is a deeply unpleasant boy who merely parrots the racist rhetoric he hears from the adults around him. While the children are isolated in the backyard, Francis begins to taunt Scout, calling Atticus a nigger lover and claiming that Atticus is ruining the family name. The sheer malice in Francis's words directed at the father she idolizes is too much for Scout to bear. Forgetting her promise to Atticus, she completely loses her temper, chases Francis down, and lands a solid punch squarely on his mouth. The ensuing chaos brings the adults rushing out. Uncle Jack, Atticus's younger brother, instantly assumes Scout is at fault and punishes her without listening to her side of the story. It is only later, when they are back in Maycomb, that Scout tearfully explains to Uncle Jack exactly what Francis had said. Uncle Jack is horrified, realizing he had acted unjustly by not hearing all the evidence, a crucial lesson in fairness that directly mirrors the larger themes of the impending trial. That evening, Scout eavesdrops on a profound, quiet conversation between Atticus and Uncle Jack. Atticus knows perfectly well that Scout is hiding around the corner, listening in the shadows, and he intentionally speaks words he wants her to hear. He admits to his brother that the Tom Robinson case is going to be incredibly ugly. He knows that the jury will not believe a black man's word over a white family's, even a family as notoriously untrustworthy as the Ewells. He speaks of Maycomb's usual disease, the blind, irrational racism that infects otherwise perfectly reasonable people. Atticus expresses his deepest, most heartbreaking fear that the town's prejudice will infect his own children. He hopes and prays that Scout and Jem will turn to him for their answers, rather than absorbing the toxic, hateful rhetoric of the town. As Scout listens in the dark, she realizes that the safe, predictable world of her childhood is fracturing. A storm is coming to Maycomb, and her father has chosen to stand directly in its path. Point 4. The meaning of true courage. As children, our definition of a hero is often shaped by physical prowess, loud victories, and undeniable strength. For Scout and Jem, Atticus Finch is many wonderful things, but he is certainly not a typical hero. He is nearly 50 years old, he wears glasses, he works in an office, and to their profound embarrassment, he does not play tackle football with the other fathers. Instead, he prefers to sit in the living room and read. In a town where men pride themselves on hunting, farming, and physical labor, Scout and Jem view their father as remarkably unremarkable. However, this perception is shattered on a quiet, seemingly ordinary day in late February, forever altering their understanding of what constitutes true strength. The children are out exploring when they notice an old, liver-colored bird dog named Tim Johnson acting incredibly strange. The dog is walking erratically down the middle of the street, twitching, Moving at a painfully slow, agonizing pace, Calpurnia takes one look at the animal and instantly recognizes the terror of the situation. It is a mad dog, infected with rabies. She frantically pulls the children inside, locks the doors, and immediately calls Atticus and the town sheriff, Mr. Hecate. The neighborhood goes completely silent, doors locking and windows shutting tightly as the deadly threat slowly advances up the street. When Atticus and Hecate arrive, the dog is dangerously close to the Radley house. Hecate carries a heavy rifle, but as he prepares to take the shot, he hesitates. He realizes that if he misses, the bullet could ricochet off the house and hit someone, and the dog would charge. In a moment that completely stuns the children, the sheriff turns to Atticus and insists that he take the gun. Atticus desperately refuses, stating he hasn't shot a gun in 30 years. But Hecate is unyielding. He thrusts the rifle into Atticus's hands, telling him that this is a one-shot job. With a reluctant sigh, Atticus drops his glasses to the ground. He steps into the middle of the empty street, raises the rifle, and completely transforms. His posture stiffens, his focus narrows, and with a single deafening crack, the dog drops instantly to the dirt, dead before it even hits the ground. Scout and Jim are absolutely paralyzed with shock. Miss Maudie later reveals to the dumbfounded children that their quiet, bookish father was once known as Old One Shot, the deadliest shot in Macomb County. Atticus gave up shooting, she explains, because he realized that his marksmanship was an unfair advantage over living creatures. He decided he would not shoot again unless he absolutely had to. Jim is overwhelmed by this revelation. He realizes that true strength doesn't require boasting. A gentleman, he declares, is someone who does what needs to be done quietly. This profound lesson in quiet endurance is further tested by the presence of Mrs. Henry Lafayette Dubose. Mrs. Dubose is an elderly, wheelchair-bound woman who lives down the street, and she is universally recognized as the meanest old woman who ever lived. Every time the children walk past her porch, she hurls vicious insults at them, criticizing their clothes, their behavior, and eventually targeting Atticus for defending Tom Robinson. One afternoon, Jim finally snaps. Driven into a blind rage by her racist insults against his father, he grabs Scout's baton and wildly destroys every single one of Mrs. Dubose's prized camellia bushes. When Atticus discovers the destruction, he does not excuse Jim's behavior, despite understanding the provocation. He forces Jim to go to Mrs. Dubose's house, apologize, and accept whatever punishment she demands. Her demand is grueling. Jim must come to her house every afternoon for a month and read out loud to her. Scout accompanies him, and the experience is a nightmare. The house smells of old age and sickness. As Jim reads, Mrs. Dubose is frequently seized by terrifying, agonizing fits, her head thrashing and her mouth foaming, before finally falling into a deep slumber, at which point an alarm clock rings and the children are dismissed. Day by day, the reading sessions grow slightly longer, the alarm clock ringing later and later. Finally, the month ends, and shortly after, Mrs. Dubose passes away. It is only then that Atticus reveals the harrowing truth behind their punishment. Mrs. Dubose was a morphine addict. Her doctor had prescribed it to her years ago as a painkiller, but knowing she had only months to live, she made a fierce, agonizing decision. She was going to die, beholden to nothing and nobody. She used Jim's reading as a distraction to slowly wean herself off the drug, fighting through the excruciating agonies of withdrawal. Atticus hands Jim a small box left by Mrs. Dubose containing a single, perfectly white camellia. He explains to his son that he wanted him to see what real courage actually looks like. It is not a man with a gun in his hand. True courage, Atticus explains, is when you know you are completely licked before you even begin, but you begin anyway and you see it through to the end, no matter what. Mrs. Dubose won her final battle, dying free of her addiction. This profound definition of courage perfectly encapsulates Atticus's own impending battle in the courtroom, setting the stage for the immense moral struggle that is about to consume their lives. Point 5. The storm gathers over Macomb. As the oppressive heat of the Alabama summer intensifies, So too does the suffocating pressure surrounding the Finch family. The impending trial of Tom Robinson is no longer a distant whisper. It is a dark storm cloud hovering directly over their heads, casting long shadows over every interaction in the town. The racial divides in Maycomb, usually maintained by a quiet, unspoken system of oppression, have suddenly been thrust into the harsh light of day, and the children find themselves caught squarely in the crossfire. The stark reality of this divided world is vividly presented to Scout and Jim when Atticus is called away to the state legislature, and Calpurnia makes the bold decision to take the children with her to Sunday services at First Purchase African Emmy Church. This is an entirely foreign environment for Scout and Jim. As they approach the unpainted church, they are confronted by a towering, aggressive woman named Lula, who fiercely challenges Calpurnia, demanding to know why she is bringing white children into a black church. The tension is palpable, a stark reminder that resentment and distrust flow in both directions in a deeply segregated society. However, the rest of the congregation, led by the gentle Reverend Sykes, warmly welcomes the children, shielding them from Lula's hostility. Inside the church, the children witness a profound display of community and resilience. There are no hymn books. The congregation sings by echoing lines spoken by the leader, a practice known as lining out, because very few of them know how to read. During the service, Reverend Sykes calls for a collection to support Helen Robinson, Tom's wife. With Tom in jail, no one in town will hire Helen, leaving her entirely unable to feed her children. The congregation, despite their own crushing poverty, gathers what little they have, demonstrating a deep communal solidarity that deeply moves Scout and Jim. They begin to grasp the severe, tangible consequences the trial is having on the Black community. Upon returning home, the children are met with an unexpected and unwelcome surprise. Aunt Alexandra has moved in. Atticus, sensing the impending chaos of the trial, felt the children needed a permanent feminine influence and someone to manage the house while he is consumed by the case. Aunt Alexandra immediately attempts to impose her strict, aristocratic values on the household. She is obsessed with the concept of gentle breeding and insists that the Finches are inherently superior due to their long history in Maycomb. She constantly clashes with Scout, demanding she wear dresses and behave like a proper lady, and she even attempts to pressure Atticus into firing Calpurnia, a suggestion Atticus firmly and immediately rejects. Amidst this domestic tension, another familiar face unexpectedly returns. One night, Scout steps on something soft and squirming under her bed. It turns out to be Dill, covered in dirt and exhausted. He has run away from his home in Meridian, taking a train and walking miles in the dark. While he initially spins a wild tale of escaping from chains in a basement, he eventually breaks down and confesses the heartbreaking truth. His mother and new stepfather simply do not want him around. They buy him toys, but they never spend time with him. Dill's profound loneliness stands in stark contrast to the fierce, unconditional love present in the Finch household, even amidst the chaos of Aunt Alexandra and the looming trial. The tension in Maycomb finally boils over into violence on a humid Sunday night. Atticus, carrying a long extension cord with a light bulb attached, casually mentions he is going out and takes the car, a rare occurrence that immediately arouses Jim's suspicions. Late at night, Jim, Scout, and Dill sneak out of the house and head downtown. They find Atticus sitting alone in a wooden chair outside the Maycomb County Jail, calmly reading a newspaper under the solitary light bulb. Inside the jail sits Tom Robinson. Suddenly, a procession of dusty, dark cars rolls into the square. A mob of sullen, hard-faced men steps out, smelling of cheap whiskey and pig pens. They are a lynch mob from the rural community of Old Sarum, intent on dragging Tom Robinson out of his cell and executing him before the trial even begins. Atticus stands up, completely unarmed, and quietly tells the men to turn around and go home. The tension is agonizing, a powder keg waiting for a single spark. Unable to contain her curiosity, Scout suddenly bursts out of her hiding place and runs to her father's side, blissfully unaware of the deadly danger. Jem and Dill follow. Atticus is visibly terrified for his children and orders Jem to take them home. But Jem, exhibiting a sudden, fierce flash of his father's stubborn courage, flatly refuses. As the aggressive men close in, Scout looks around the circle of angry, anonymous faces and suddenly recognizes one. It is Mr. Cunningham, the father of her classmate Walter. In her pure, ringing, innocent voice, Scout begins to try and make conversation. She asks Mr. Cunningham about his entailments, his legal troubles, and reminds him that she goes to school with his son, Walter, whom she had once invited over for dinner. Her simple, polite, ordinary conversation pierces the heavy, murderous atmosphere. She inadvertently strips away the anonymity of the mob, forcing Mr. Cunningham to stand there not as a faceless vigilante, but as a father, a neighbor, and a man who has received kindness from Atticus Finch. Overwhelmed by shame, Mr. Cunningham suddenly squats down, places his heavy hands on Scout's shoulders, and says, "I'll tell him you said hey, little lady." He then turns to the mob and orders them to clear out. The cars drive away into the night. It is a breathtaking moment of profound grace. A little girl's innocent empathy has accomplished what violence and threats could never do. It diffused a lynch mob and saved two men's lives. As they walk home in the dark, Atticus reaches out and affectionately massages Jem's hair, an unspoken gesture of immense pride for his son's bravery, as the ultimate test of the courtroom looms just hours away. Point 6. Judgment Day in the Hot Courthouse. The day of Tom Robinson's trial arrives not with solemnity, but with the chaotic, bustling energy of a carnival. People from all corners of Macomb County pour into the town square. Farmers in their faded overalls, townspeople in their Sunday best, and the Black community standing quietly on the periphery. The atmosphere is thick with anticipation and an uncomfortable, sweltering heat. The courthouse itself is an imposing structure, and inside it is packed to the rafters. Segregation rules absolute. The white citizens take up the entirety of the ground floor, while the Black citizens are relegated to the stifling heat of the balcony. Scout, Jem, and Dill, having snuck away from Aunt Alexandra's watchful eye, find themselves unable to secure a seat on the main floor. They are rescued by the kind Reverend Sykes, who ushers them up a steep staircase to the colored balcony. Here, four Black men immediately stand up and offer their front row seats to the children. From this elevated vantage point, they have a perfect view of the entire courtroom. Looking down upon the judge's bench, the jury box filled with stern-faced white farmers, and their father, Atticus, sitting calmly at the defense table next to Tom Robinson. The prosecution, led by the smooth-talking Mr. Gilmer, presents its case first. The sheriff, Heck Tate, is called to the stand. He testifies that on the night of the alleged crime, Bob Ewell summoned him to his house, claiming his daughter Mayella had been attacked. Heck Tate vividly describes Mayella's injuries. She was beaten, severely bruised, and notably, her right eye was completely blackened. Under cross-examination, Atticus asks a crucial, seemingly simple question: did anyone call a doctor to examine Mayella? Heck Tate admits that no one did. Next to the stand is Bob Ewell, a man who embodies the absolute worst of Macomb. He is arrogant, unwashed, and aggressively ignorant, strutting to the witness chair like a proud rooster. He loudly and crudely testifies that he saw Tom Robinson attacking his daughter through a window. Atticus treats Ewell with a polite, razor-sharp courtesy that clearly unnerves the man. Atticus asks Ewell to write his name on an envelope. Ewell proudly complies, revealing a vital piece of evidence. Bob Ewell is entirely left-handed. The jury murmurs as the implication lands. Whoever beat Mayella Ewell, striking her heavily on the right side of her face, was almost certainly left-handed. Then comes Mayella Ewell. She is a tragic, pathetic figure, clearly terrified and defensive. Unlike her father, she attempts to keep somewhat clean, famously maintaining a few bright red geraniums in the yard of their filthy cabin, a desperate, heartbreaking attempt at creating beauty in a life devoid of it. She testifies that she asked Tom Robinson to come inside the fence to chop up a chifferobe, and when she turned around, he attacked her. When Atticus cross-examines her, he addresses her as ma'am and Miss Mayella. Mayella, having never known a day of respect in her life, angrily accuses Atticus of mocking her. Atticus gently but relentlessly pokes holes in her story. He asks her why the other children didn't hear her screams, why her father didn't call a doctor, and whether it was actually her father who beat her. Mayella eventually breaks down into hysterical, angry tears, shouting out a final, desperate refusal to answer any more questions before fleeing the stand. Finally, the defense presents its case, and Tom Robinson takes the oath. Tom is a quiet, deeply respectful, and powerfully built Black man. But as he stands up, a collective gasp ripples through the courtroom. His left arm is entirely mangled and shriveled, hanging uselessly at his side, the result of a devastating accident in a cotton gin when he was a boy. The physical impossibility of the prosecution's case is laid bare for everyone to see. Tom Robinson, a man with no functioning left arm, could not possibly have inflicted the heavy right-sided bruising on Mayella Ewell's face, nor could he have aggressively choked her with 2 hands as she claimed. Tom tells the actual truth of what happened. He explains that Mayella frequently called him over to do small chores, and he always helped her without accepting payment, driven by a simple, profound sympathy for her miserable life. On the day in question, she invited him inside the house, revealing she had sent her siblings into town for ice cream. In a moment of desperate loneliness, she made advances toward him, hugging him and kissing him. Tom, trapped by the terrifying societal rules of the South, knew he could not push a white woman away without risking his life, so he simply tried to flee. As he ran, Bob Ewell appeared at the window, screaming horrific insults not at Tom, but at his own daughter, furious at her transgression. The truth is undeniable, ringing clearly through the hot air of the courthouse. But then, during Mr. Gilmer's aggressive, condescending cross-examination, Tom makes a fatal, unforgivable mistake in the deeply racist society of Maycomb. When asked why he helped Mayella for free, Tom quietly says, "I felt right sorry for her." The courtroom freezes. The idea of a Black man feeling pity for a white woman is considered the ultimate insult to the racial hierarchy. The damage is done. The sheer injustice and the hateful, sneering tone of Mr. Gilmer are too much for Dill to handle. He begins to sob uncontrollably, forcing Scout to take him outside into the shade of the courtyard. Dill cries for the cruelty of the world, for the way Mr. Gilmer talked to Tom as if he were less than human. It is the heartbreaking sound of innocence shattering against the immovable wall of prejudice as the trial moves toward its inevitable tragic conclusion. Point 7. The tragedy of a good man. The stifling heat of the courtroom seems to condense as Atticus Finch stands up to deliver his closing argument. He unbuttons his vest, takes off his coat, and loosens his tie, an unprecedented stripping away of his formal armor, signifying the deep, personal plea he is about to make. He does not speak to the jury with legal jargon or condescension. He speaks to them as neighbors, as human beings. Atticus meticulously deconstructs the prosecution's case, pointing out the absolute lack of medical evidence and the blatant contradictions in the Ewell's testimonies. But Atticus goes further than the facts of the case. He bravely addresses the deeply ingrained societal taboo at the heart of the trial. He explains that Mayella Ewell is the victim of cruel poverty and an abusive father, but she is not the victim of a crime committed by Tom Robinson. She broke a rigid, time-honored code of their society by kissing a Black man, and in her desperate shame and fear of her father, she sought to destroy the evidence of her transgression by sacrificing Tom. Atticus reminds the all-white jury that the assumption that all Black men are immoral is a lie as black as Tom Robinson's skin. He makes a final, impassioned plea stating that the courtroom is the one institution in America where all men are created equal. "In the name of God," Atticus begs them, his voice thick with emotion, "do your duty." The jury retires to deliberate, and an agonizing, heavy silence falls over the courthouse. Hours tick by. Afternoon bleeds into evening, and evening stretches into the dark hours of the night. For Jim, this delay is a massive victory. He is absolutely convinced that the overwhelming evidence will prevail. He believes in the logic of the law and the fundamental goodness of the men of Maycomb. But Atticus knows better. The very fact that the jury has taken several hours rather than a few minutes is a monumental, albeit tragic, step forward for civil rights in Maycomb, but it is not enough to secure a miracle. When the jury finally returns, Scout notices something chilling. A jury never looks at a defendant it has convicted, and as the 12 men file into the box, not a single one of them looks at Tom Robinson. The verdict is read, sounding like the heavy strike of an anvil. Guilty. 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 The word hits Jem with physical force. His shoulders jerk as if he has been stabbed. Tears of sheer, burning injustice stream down his face. The pure, idealistic world he believed in completely collapses around him. As Atticus quietly packs his briefcase, entirely defeated but thoroughly dignified, he walks down the middle aisle toward the exit. In the colored balcony, a profound moment of respect occurs. Reverend Sykes gently instructs Scout, "Miss Jean Louise, stand up. Your father's passin'." Every single black person in the balcony rises to their feet in silent, magnificent tribute to the man who fought for the truth, even knowing he would lose. The morning after the trial, the Finch household wakes to a staggering sight. The back steps are entirely covered in food: chickens, rolls, vegetables, and jars of preserves. The black community of Maycomb, despite having practically nothing, has brought an overwhelming bounty to express their profound gratitude to Atticus. Atticus's eyes fill with tears at the gesture, a bittersweet reminder of the humanity that still exists amidst the hatred. Across the street, Miss Maudie bakes a large cake and slices a piece for Jem, comforting him by explaining that there are men in this world who are born to do our unpleasant jobs for us, and Atticus is one of them. She points out that Judge Taylor intentionally assigned Atticus to the case because he knew Atticus was the only man who could keep a jury out that long. It was just a baby step, she says, but it was a step. Tragically, this small glimmer of hope is soon extinguished by a devastating reality. A few weeks later, Atticus abruptly interrupts a missionary circle meeting hosted by Aunt Alexandra. His face is pale and entirely drained of life. He calls Aunt Alexandra Calpurnia and Miss Maudie into the kitchen and delivers the horrific news. Tom Robinson is dead. While at the Enfield prison farm, waiting for an appeal that Atticus firmly believed they had a good chance of winning, Tom simply gave up hope. He had lost faith in the white man's justice system. During an exercise period, he made a frantic, desperate dash for the prison fence. The guards fired warning shots, but Tom kept climbing. They shot him 17 times. The sheer brutality and excessiveness of the violence, 17 bullet holes for a man with one arm trying to climb a fence, underscores the senseless, ingrained cruelty of the racial divide. When the news reaches the town, most of Maycomb dismisses it as typical behavior for a black man, cruel and dismissive to the end. But Mr. Underwood, the racist publisher of the local newspaper, inexplicably writes a blistering editorial. He likens Tom's death to the senseless slaughter of songbirds by hunters and children. It is a profound realization for Scout. Tom had been tried in the secret courts of men's hearts, and from the moment Mayella Ewell opened her mouth, he was a dead man. The tragedy of Tom Robinson leaves a permanent, jagged scar on the conscience of the children, fundamentally altering how they view their beloved broken town. Point 8. The Aftermath and the Shadows. Following the devastating conclusion of the trial and the senseless death of Tom Robinson, a heavy, unsettling autumn settles over Maycomb County. On the surface, the town seems to slide back into its normal, sluggish routine, eager to sweep the ugly realities of the summer under the rug. However, beneath the veneer of polite Southern society, a venomous current of vengeance is quietly festering. Bob Ewell, despite winning the case, is a man humiliated. Atticus Finch stripped away the last shred of Ewell's dignity in front of the entire county exposing him as an abusive, ignorant liar. Ewell knows that nobody in town believes his story, and his festering hatred demands retribution. Bob Ewell's malice manifests in a series of cowardly, insidious actions. First, he publicly confronts Atticus at the post office. Ewell aggressively approaches him, curses at him, and spits a mouthful of chewing tobacco directly into Atticus's face, threatening to kill him if it takes the rest of his life. Atticus, displaying his characteristic, almost superhuman stoicism, simply pulls out a handkerchief, wipes his face, and walks away. When Jem expresses deep fear for his father's life, Atticus calmly explains that if Bob Ewell spitting in his face saves Mayella one extra beating, he will gladly take it. Atticus assumes Ewell has gotten the venom out of his system, a tragic miscalculation of the depths of human depravity. But Ewell is not finished. He begins to stalk Helen Robinson, Tom's widow, following her as she walks to work, muttering foul curses and trying to intimidate her until Link Dees, Tom's former employer, threatens to have Ewell arrested. Furthermore, an unknown intruder, widely suspected to be Ewell, attempts to break into the home of Judge Taylor on a quiet Sunday night. A creeping, palpable sense of dread begins to permeate the cooling autumn air. There is a monster lurking in the shadows of Maycomb, but unlike the imaginary ghost of Boo Radley, this monster is very real, deeply resentful, and utterly devoid of a moral compass. As October arrives, the town prepares for the annual Halloween festival, organized at the high school auditorium to keep the local children out of trouble. The highlight of the evening is an agricultural pageant celebrating the diverse produce of Maycomb County. Scout is assigned the role of a ham. Her costume, constructed by Mrs. Crenshaw, is an elaborate, entirely cumbersome contraption made of chicken wire and brown cloth. It completely encases her, leaving only 2 small eye holes, restricting her movement and pinning her arms closely to her sides. On the night of the pageant, Atticus and Aunt Alexandra are too exhausted to attend, so Jem, now a protective older brother in the 7th grade, escorts Scout to the school. The night is pitch black, moonless, and unusually warm. As they walk across the deserted schoolyard, they pass beneath the massive ancient oak tree near the Radley property. In the heavy silence, Cecil Jacobs suddenly leaps out from the darkness, terrifying them as a harmless prank. This brief moment of levity masks the true danger that awaits them. The pageant is a chaotic disaster. Scout, enclosed in the stifling dark of her ham costume, falls asleep behind the stage and entirely misses her cue to enter. When she finally rushes onto the stage late, she ruins the grand finale, much to the amusement of the audience and the fury of the pageant director. Humiliated, Scout refuses to take off her bulky costume, wanting to hide her face in shame as she and Jem begin the long, dark walk back home. As they leave the lights of the school behind and plunge into the absolute darkness of the path, the atmosphere shifts violently. The air is deadly quiet. Suddenly, Jem stops. He hears a sound. It is a soft, rhythmic rustling like the swish of cotton trousers dragging against the dirt. At first, they assume it is Cecil Jacobs trying to scare them again. They call out to him, but the darkness offers no reply. The footsteps only move when they move and stop when they stop. Panic begins to claw at their chests. They realize, with a sickening jolt of absolute terror, that they are being hunted. When they reach the massive oak tree, the silent stalker lunges. The darkness erupts into pure chaos. Scout, completely trapped inside her wire ham costume, hears the terrifying sounds of a violent struggle. She hears heavy breathing, the sickening thud of fists hitting flesh, and Jem's desperate, agonizing scream as a dull, horrifying crunch of bone echoes through the night. She is violently shoved to the ground, her costume crushing around her. She feels strong, rough hands grabbing at her, trying to squeeze the breath from her lungs. Suddenly, the weight is violently yanked off her. In the confusion, Scout hears the sounds of a new struggle. Another man has entered the fray, violently pulling the attacker away. Through the tiny eye hole of her costume, Scout sees the faint outline of a man carrying a heavy, limp burden in his arms, walking unsteadily toward the glowing lights of the Finch house. Terrified, bruised, and completely disoriented, Scout scrambles to her feet and blindly follows the mysterious savior into the light, leaving the horrifying darkness of the woods behind. Point 9. The conclusion. The transition from the terrifying, violent darkness of the schoolyard to the bright, sterile light of the Finch hallway is jarring. When Scout finally stumbles through the front door, the house is in a state of frantic, terrified motion. Aunt Alexandra is rushing wildly with towels and water, her strict demeanor completely shattered by sheer panic. Atticus is on the telephone, his face pale and strained, desperately calling for Dr. Reynolds and the sheriff, Heck Tate. Scout violently tears off the suffocating remains of her ham costume and follows the commotion into Jim's room. Jim is lying unconscious on his bed, his left arm deeply bruised and bent at a completely unnatural, sickening angle. Dr. Reynolds arrives swiftly, examining Jim with grim efficiency. He assures the terrified family that Jim's arm is broken at the elbow and he has a nasty bump on his head, but he is going to survive. The immense, crushing weight of fear begins to lift slightly from Atticus's shoulders, but the mystery of what exactly happened in the dark woods remains unsolved. Moments later, Sheriff Heck Tate walks through the front door. His face is entirely unreadable, etched with deep, grim lines. He holds a flannel shirt and asks Scout if it belongs to her, which she confirms. Heck Tate looks at Atticus, his voice steady but carrying an immense weight. He announces that he has found a man lying dead under the great oak tree. It is Bob Ewell, with a kitchen knife driven deeply upwards under his ribs. He is dead, his vengeance finally, permanently extinguished. A stunned silence fills the room. Atticus is violently shaken. He cannot comprehend the magnitude of the violence that has just touched his children. In the commotion, Scout is gently asked to explain exactly what happened from the moment they left the school. As she recounts the terrifying footsteps, the sudden attack, and the violent struggle in the dark, she mentions that someone else pulled Mr. Ewell off of them. She turns to point to the man who carried Jim home, assuming it was a neighbor who had heard the noise. Standing quietly in the darkest corner of the room is a man Scout has never seen before. He is alarmingly pale, with sickly white hands that look as though they have never seen the sun. He is incredibly thin, wearing khakis and a torn denim shirt. His hair is dead and thin, and his eyes are a startling, colorless gray. As Scout's eyes meet his, the man gives a tiny, almost imperceptible, hesitant smile. In a profound, breathtaking moment of sheer clarity, the pieces of her childhood puzzle snap together. The gifts in the tree, the blanket during the fire, the miniature soap carvings, the man standing before her is not a phantom, a monster, or a ghoul. He is a deeply shy, incredibly gentle human being who had watched over them from the shadows for years. And when they were in mortal danger, he had risked everything to step into the terrifying outside world to save their lives. Tears well up in Scout's eyes as she addresses him with a quiet, profound reverence. "Hey, Boo." Arthur Boo Radley simply nods. The ghost of Maycomb has finally come out, revealing himself to be the truest guardian angel the children could have ever hoped for. However, the reality of Bob Ewell's death demands an explanation, leading to a tense, deeply philosophical standoff on the front porch between Atticus Finch and Sheriff Heck Tate. Atticus, a man whose entire life is governed by a rigid adherence to the law and absolute honesty, assumes that Jim, in a desperate struggle to protect his sister, managed to grab Ewell's knife and stab him in self-defense. Atticus is adamant that there must be a trial, that the truth must be told in the open. He refuses to have his son live under a shadow of whispers and suspicion, stating that if he covers this up, he can never look his children in the eye again. Heck Tate, however, is fiercely, aggressively stubborn. He loudly insists that Jim did not kill Bob Ewell. He claims that Ewell, in his drunken rage, stumbled over a root in the dark, and fell directly onto his own knife. Atticus argues back, believing the sheriff is trying to protect Jim. But Hecate suddenly steps closer, his voice dropping to a fierce, emotional whisper. He is not protecting Jem, he reveals. He is protecting Arthur Radley. Hecate makes it perfectly clear Bob Ewell was a menace to society who caused the death of an innocent black man and then tried to murder two innocent children. Arthur Radley, a painfully shy man who wants nothing more than to be left alone, did the town a massive service by stopping him. To drag Boo Radley into the limelight, to subject him to the loud, intrusive gratitude of the town in the harsh glare of an inquest would be a profound cruelty. It would destroy him. "Let the dead bury the dead this time, Mr. Finch," Hecate pleads. "Let the dead bury the dead." Atticus slowly processes this profound deviation from the strict letter of the law. He looks down at his young daughter, seeking her understanding. He asks Scout if she can understand why they must say Bob Ewell fell on his knife. Scout looks up at her father, her eyes reflecting the immense, painful growth she has experienced over the past few years. She nods solemnly and offers a metaphor that perfectly encapsulates the entire tragedy of their world. "Well, it'd be sort of like shooting a mockingbird, wouldn't it?" Atticus is deeply moved by her profound moral comprehension. The mockingbird, a creature that does absolutely nothing but sing its heart out for us, causing no harm, demanding no destruction, is the ultimate symbol of innocence. Tom Robinson was a mockingbird, tragically destroyed by the town's hatred. Arthur Radley is a mockingbird, silently watching over the children, and to expose him to the harshness of the world would be a sin. The night concludes with Scout gently taking Boo Radley by his hand, a hand she notes feels like a warm, soft piece of dough, and walking him back to his house. She guides him gently, allowing him to escort her, preserving his dignity. When they reach the Radley porch, Boo steps inside. The door shuts quietly, and Scout never sees him again. Before walking back to her own home, Scout turns around and stands on the Radley porch, looking out at the neighborhood from a completely new vantage point. She sees the street exactly as Boo must have seen it for all those years. She visualizes the seasons passing, the children playing, the mad dog, the fire, and finally the attack in the dark. She realizes that Boo Radley had given them their lives, and they had never given him anything in return. In the quiet darkness, Scout finally completely steps inside another person's skin and walks around in it. She has survived the destruction of her childhood innocence, emerging with a profound, unbreakable empathy, forever changed by the quiet courage of the father she loves and the invisible neighbor who saved her life.